Well, welcome to Voice of San Diego at Home. I am Scott Lewis. It is August 26th, 2020. Incredible day in this incredible year. It's live at 5. This episode is sponsored by the City of San Diego Retired Employees Association, a nonprofit organization created to advance the social and economic welfare of retired city employees and their beneficiaries. I speak there every year. Love that they're sponsoring the show. Thank you, guys. We got a great show. I brought my friend Andrew Keatts on. He's going to come talk about his story today, a big one about the history of single-family home zoning in San Diego. We'll get to that. Let's go through some news, though, Andy. Is that all right?
Great. Let's do it.
All right. So massive unsurvivable hurricane is bearing down on the Gulf Coast. Have you ever heard the word unsurvivable? Unsurvivable?
No, I don't think I have.
Never from a government agency. A unsurvivable event is coming. We have a third night of the all virtual RNC convention.
Unsurvivable.
Just online, just normal. Yeah, unsurvivable. We have an impromptu work stoppage that has apparently shut down all professional sports. The NBA games in particular, which were being played in a bubble in Orlando, Florida, because of a pandemic. And they've been shut down because of a protest of police violence that led to street violence and vigilante murder. Totally normal day in 2020. Oh, there's fires too. Apocalyptic fires.
Yeah.
The second and third worst fires in California history.
Yeah, they're like not even above the fold in any newspaper in America right now. It's insane.
It's just an incredible time, but we've got a bunch of local things to talk about. We'll go through all of them and more. Let's start first with an update about Council President Georgette Gomez has a former aide named Kelvin Barrios who's running for her seat. There are 9 city council district seats in the city of San Diego. He wants District 9. That's the one Georgette Gomez is leaving because she's running for Congress. So she said to you today she won't help Mr. Barrios run for the seat until the DA, the district attorney, completes a review into his alleged financial malfeasance. Barrios is running to replace Gomez. What is he accused of, and what is happening?
He is accused of essentially appropriating funds that belonged to a political club, like a San Diego Democratic political club, that he was the treasurer for on himself. There was a complaint made to the district attorney with a transaction history of this alleged impropriety, and the Union Tribune on Sunday reported that the district attorney's office, their public integrity unit, has indeed launched an investigation into the matter. As per their policy, they don't confirm or deny that that's the case. Kelvin Barrios took it upon himself on Monday to say that he had already been cleared by the district attorney's office.
They dropped the investigation. Nothing to see here, folks.
And the district attorney's office told us, while they continue to not confirm or deny the existence of any investigation, it is not the case that they have dismissed any complaint on this matter specifically.
So they don't confirm or deny, but they kind of confirm.
It certainly, and like now today, it's like the veil is off. Like Georgette Gomez in her statement is just like, well, I'm not going to do anything for him until the investigation's over. The investigation that no one is confirming or denying.
Yeah, well, but then yesterday also, after it came out that the DA said that, Kelvin Barrios came out and said, oh, that was a mess up. I didn't mean to do that.
That press release was released in error. And so he had 4 specific bullet points professing his vindication on the matter, that he had been cleared. All 4 of them were either outright falsehoods or at the very least misleading. He said the city attorney cleared him. The city attorney hadn't received a complaint. He said the FPPC cleared him. They actually said that it just wasn't in their purview because it was a volunteer position. They're not allowed to look at it. He said the district attorney cleared him. The district attorney said that that's not the case. And he said that the county's ethics committee had also cleared him. They said, no, we're just waiting for more information to come in. So 0 for 4.
Oof. Great stories on the site. Like to catch up on that. Again, this is about the District 9 City Council race. There are 5 City Council races right now. This is one of them. Kelvin Barrios is running against Sean Elo, who is, I think, he didn't file the complaints, or friends or supporters of his did, something like that? Oh, he did. Okay.
Yes. He did so publicly. We actually wrote about it at the time.
Right. Well, it's that's an interesting drama to follow. Get that at voicesandiego.org. Another piece of news: KPBS today announced it was joining Voice of San Diego, joining us in our public records lawsuit against San Diego County, seeking information related to the COVID-19 outbreaks that are happening throughout the county. Beyond the terms, all they're giving us right now every day is there were 8 outbreaks, there were 5 outbreaks, there were 6 outbreaks. They were in restaurant and bar, another one in a business setting, another one in healthcare, and we want more information. Mm-hmm. And we have a couple reasons for that. I think the main one is, what good is that? Tell us where it's happening, how many people are being infected. What were they outsourced? If it's at restaurant and bars, were they outside? That would be important. Because we are all operating on the assumption that outdoor dining is okay because it's happening. But is this, when you put restaurant, bar in there, they're saying it's not? I think both of us have indicated we'd be okay negotiating to redact, or having some discussions about redacting specific information, is that if that's going to be a major part of this hang up. But they've basically said, no, we're not going to even look for these documentations until we're after the emergency passes, years.
Yeah. So I keep seeing people say that they find the county's defense understandable or in some way compelling because they recognize the potential stigma of naming and shaming these restaurants or businesses or the houses that have an outbreak. And it's very frustrating because, as you say, we've already indicated that we're willing to negotiate on those matters. But it's more frustrating than that because this isn't new. The world of public records has long ago figured out a way to provide public information while protecting people's confidential or private information. The redactions work. We know how to redact things. It's fine.
Yeah.
We don't. It's perfectly true that there's some level of information that we don't need. And it's also perfectly true that the amount of information we're getting right now is useless. So we need to land somewhere in between what we have now and everything that the county has.
Yeah.
And we're willing to compromise a little, but not with what we have right now.
Because it's nothing.
Because it's completely useless. It is not. It is a facade of information.
It's performative transparency. It really is. It has no. So here's a situation. So one of the reasons we're so interested in this is because they themselves set 7 outbreaks per 7 days as an important trigger. It was not the most important trigger in the hierarchies of a bunch of triggers that were put out that time, but it was a trigger, and it was a trigger that was then used and now being used by San Diego Unified School District to say, we will not open as long as that trigger is triggered. We're not going to open schools, which means it's only 7 outbreaks per 7 days. Well, they're at 21 as of yesterday, and that number has not been going down. It stays there.
Right.
And so yesterday or 2 days ago, Taryn Mento from KPBS asked about this deal, what these outbreaks aren't changing. What are you going to do to lower these outbreaks? They're not going down. Every other number is going down. This was Taryn Mento to the County of San Diego's public health officer, Wilma Wooten.
And just to kind of ask in a little bit of a different way, we still are hitting our own trigger on community outbreaks, and Voice of San Diego, Scott Lewis just pointed this out on social media. We've seen a lot of the numbers improve, but not this one. And this one was intended to inform you all when more restrictions may be needed. We've had a lot of restrictions already put into place. So what are we going to do about this number that, it's come down a little bit, but has not gone down to what we want it to?
Are you speaking of outbreaks?
community outbreaks.
Yes, community outbreaks. Well, we will continue to monitor and do the same things we have always been doing in terms of depending on where the sector is. If it's restaurants, we have a great relationship and partnership with our Department of Environmental Health, where we have staff that are then deployed to a particular restaurant and go in and conduct an assessment of what strategies need to be improved upon. And that has always worked well, and that is working well during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So we're going to do what we've been doing.
We're going to keep monitoring it
because it's working.
Yeah. And previously she had said, this is Dr. Wooten had said that the reason they don't need to release more information is because they've determined that those outbreaks are not a health concern, that they're not a problem. It's very frustrating.
Then what are we doing?
Yeah, I don't understand. Why are they a part of the trigger mechanism? And also, like, it's just a preposterous response to any sort of public records request. Like, no, you don't get those records because we've determined that there's no cause for concern there.
Right.
Hey, we'd like those emails about your, wine and cheese party with a developer, Mr. Mayor. Can we have those emails? No, we determined that they're fine. It's not an issue, bro.
The city is literally better off if these records don't come out. Thus, they're not coming out. I think
it's insane.
So I think those are the 2 points. Like, we want the information so that we can help people understand how to live in this community. The whole point of the next few years are going to be, how do you live to the maximum living without causing this to get worse? And we're testing it. Obviously we found out it seems like beaches are fine, that kind of thing. Like, we're testing and finding in this equilibrium. So we want to be able to help in that with the information about the outbreaks. But then the second point is also, we kind of want to review how things went this summer, because it wasn't great.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's frustrating to me. Like, there's an accountability component to this. Without more robust information, it's impossible to determine whether individual cities or the county's public health department has done a good job. You say that this summer went bad. It seems all indications are that that's the case. That case counts went up, hospitalizations went up. But we would
canceled school, yeah.
to do any sort of analysis that determines how that happened, who's at fault for how that happened, how we make sure it doesn't happen again. We don't have any of that information. And if their answer is, I know, but we're doing that work, it's like, I'm sorry, that's not how this relationship between journalists and or just the public in general and government agencies works. We don't just take your word for it. We don't just trust you. I'm sorry.
And they had been doing so much better after the hepatitis A crisis that they had 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They had been much more transparent this time around. They're working real hard to make sure people understand what happens every day. They're producing nice graphics and visualizations and data every day. But this is a remnant of the old county. This is their heart that comes through. You know what I mean? This is like, and so I think, they've been hostile to public records for a long time. And I think that we're going to have to deal with that. All right. We have a lot of things to go over. Andy, any other points on our lawsuit or on KPBS's involvement? When you get public radio fired up about something, it's hot. It's hot.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get into your story, Andy. I want to talk about this point. Single family zoning in the city of San Diego. Now, single family zoning, let's just talk about that for a second. What is single family zoning? It's just a house separated from other houses that you can have in an area.
Yeah, a house separated from other houses in an area. It's a development restriction over a large swath of area, a city determined piece of area that each lot can only have a certain type of development on it. In this case, a single family home, which is a standalone structure on a yard of its own. And you can't even subdivide those lots to get smaller lots. The lots are the way they are, as they were originally mapped whenever the developer first built them. And so in the city of San Diego, and this number is pretty consistent with many, many cities in the West, specifically in the city of San Diego, of all the areas where it's legal to build housing, in 70% of them, you can only build single family housing.
Okay, so that's distinguished from like you're taking out like industrial zones and stuff like that where you can't build housing.
Or freeways or parks or
so not of total land, but of land where you can have people can live. 70% of it within the city of San Diego is set aside for single family homes.
Single family homes only, yes.
All right.
Of all else, yes.
Okay, this wasn't birthed with the American nation on this continent. There was decisions made, you found 100 years ago or so, which set this in motion. Talk about the history. What sort of leads San Diego and other cities around this period to say what we need to do is separate homes and create a special zoning for them?
Yeah, so in the 1910s, around 1910, a bunch of cities started experimenting with basically racial zoning. It was laws that would restrict who could live in certain areas based explicitly on race. It was a Jim Crow era law. And in 1917, there was a landmark Supreme Court ruling, Buchanan v. Warbley, was actually on a Louisville law that in Louisville, a black person was not allowed to buy a house or property on a block where more than 50% of the residents were white. And the Supreme Court struck that law down, which had the effect of outlawing this sort of racialized zoning across the country. Now, it's interesting though, when they did that, their ruling was not explicitly on because it was unfair to do this to black people. It was because you were taking property rights from the white homeowner by restricting who he could sell it to. So it was actually found on property rights grounds that you were that this was a problem. But in any case, it had the effect of outlawing racial zoning, and then as a result, cities started doing something else, which was essentially what would become the modern zoning that we know today, which is they would create systems where you could, on the basis of health and welfare, you could start separating your city into different districts for single-family housing, multifamily housing, businesses, commerce, and industrial areas. And so cities around the country started passing those in the years after 1917. San Diego was very much part of that trend and was, following the fashions of the moment when in 1923, it adopted its first zoning ordinance. And that was a zoning ordinance that was almost copy and pasted from Los Angeles. And so then they were sort of in a holding pattern after they had adopted that for 2 years as the city of Los Angeles's zoning ordinance was appealed up to the state Supreme Court. And in fact, the city attorney for the city of San Diego got in a bunch of different arguments with the city council and mayor because the city attorney's belief was that this was illegal and that this wouldn't pass the Supreme Court's tests either. But eventually the Los Angeles zoning law in California was blessed by the state Supreme Court in 1925, and a year later, a landmark ruling that basically allowed zoning to proliferate across the country, the Euclid ruling of the National Supreme Court blessed zoning. And that's basically where we are today. It's a major turning point in how cities are built.
Now, the zoning that happened in San Diego carved up San Diego, as you said, during this period of where you can have actual single-family homes and where other things can operate. Did that explicitly warn of racial integration, or did it at that point have already switched over to euphemisms or other language? What was the actual fire behind some of these restrictions?
Yeah, so the idea that single family zoning has been exclusionary and had the effect of creating segregated cities is not obscure in urban planning worlds. And in fact, I sort of had a bit of sheepishness when I was writing this, that I would be writing something that a bunch of planners and subject matter experts would say, well, yeah, no, duh. but eventually recognized that, there's a lot of people who aren't subject matter experts on this. So the idea that this procedure has had the effect of achieving segregation, whether it was the explicit intent of the people who came up with it, is not really in dispute. There are some books that suggest that the people who came up with these things in other writings in their lives did have very clearly racial motivations and racist sentiments. In San Diego, and I spent a lot of time in the San Diego Union's archives. Shout out to the San Diego Union's archives, very searchable, nice, easy to use. It was rare but not unheard of for there to be coded racial terms and from time to time explicit racial terms about the importance of zoning. There were some articles about the districts being ruined by the arrival of a different class of people. There was the San Diego Realty Board at one point asked the city to toughen its zoning standards because segregating races was appropriate for general assimilation. There was some, some stuff about how in Chicago there had been findings that vice and crime could be appropriately addressed through zoning changes. And there was this professor from Cal Berkeley who traveled to San Diego a lot and used to draw really large crowds for his talks about the importance of city planning, as it was called at the time. And his one of his main points, which is really off the wall, certainly today, but seems off the wall even then, was that an apartment could never be a home, and that everything in an apartment is unlike a family or a home, and it can't be trusted, and that the only true living situation for American happiness was single-family homes, and that's why zoning was so important. So it really was outwardly and overtly the motivation in San Diego was giving a special area for single-family homes. There's even one instance in Mission Hills right around the time when this was a very hot topic. There was somebody tried to build a business in an area that the residents were already trying to create into a single-family zone area, and his property got burnt to the ground, and both the property owner and the police suspected arson from the zoning advocates. So it was not to say that, well, no, it wasn't racially motivated in all ways. They just wanted a place for single family homes, is not to say that it was anything less than a very heated debate at the time.
Yeah, and obviously it has structured San Diego the way it is still now. Obviously, there are a lot of different people in some parts of the community and a lot of other people in other parts of the community. And that was in part by design and partly what we've been grappling with as a community. So right now we have something that is going forward at the mayor's office. He's pushing forward, and this is part of why you wanted to do the story. He's pushing forward a plan he calls complete communities. And let me see if I can do this. What he's saying and what the city staff's goal with this is to make it easier to build larger, more dense multifamily housing within certain areas of transit and other parts of the community to make it to provide more housing. If they do build some more housing in these areas, the developers will get other benefits, but they'll also have to pay to make the area nicer, infrastructure, parks, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and crucially, they'll have to include 10% of the units from the previously zoned, for whatever is zoned today in whatever they're building, 10% of that amount for low-income housing and 10% for moderate-income housing. And then they get the bonus on top of all that.
So, but none of this applies to single-family home zoned residential. Now, just to be clear, so I live in an area where there's a house, there's another house, but then there's also like a duplex or even like a multifamily. That is not a single-family home zoning. What are we actually speaking of when we talk about single-family home, or is it?
Well, so it's just whatever your underlying zone is. So okay. I would have to look at your neighborhood. It may be the case that when your neighborhood was zoned, that there was a specific little carve out for an area that was allowed to have multifamily housing. It could be that a developer sought special permission to build that 20, 30 years ago. And so it's in, despite it not qualifying for the underlying zoning. But what would happen here is whatever property you own, and you go out and you hire a developer to build on that property, whatever is already on the books that's allowed there. If you are currently zoned to allow for townhouses or apartments to be built in an area, you're eligible to be part of this new Complete Communities program. If you have if that's a single family property, it's not eligible at all, and single family homes can be assured that they're not going to see any change in the areas that are zoned for single family homes. And that's not a small thing, like this program is limited to areas within a half mile of trolley stations or bus areas where there are two bus lines that run every 15 minutes or better, because it's a state term. It's called a transit priority area. Even in transit priority areas in the city of San Diego, even in the places where they're near transit that are kind of the basis for all of these sorts of development regulations that the city's pushing to allow for people to commute by bike or walk or to get to jobs while lowering their carbon footprint. Within the transit priority areas, in the places where you can build housing, 50% are single family zones only, even within.
So they're already out.
Yeah, and that's already out. Before you even start there, that's not part of this program.
Wow, that's fascinating. So
now the mayor's office said that the reason that they excluded single family zones here is because it would essentially make the program much more complicated, and it would take a much longer time to get it adopted if you were going to change that. Because if you're going to change that, then you have to rezone these properties, and a rezone triggers a bunch of California Environmental Quality Act studies and regulations,
plans, all that.
Yeah, so it could take 3-5 years to do it. In that case, if they limit it and say that it's just applies to multifamily housing, then you could do it in months instead of years. Now, I think it would be silly to say that there isn't also a political benefit to being able to go out into the community and say, hey, look, if you have a single family home and you like your single family home, don't worry, because this doesn't apply to you.
Yeah. It also has the benefit of not angering people who live in single family home zones then too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I think there's a distinct political benefit to it.
Right, exactly.
A procedural benefit to to the fact that you can do it more quickly, but there's no question that up against community opposition, this is a significant political boost that you don't have to say that you can kind of cut off at the knees any arguments about to borrow a term from a figure in the city that they're coming for our homes.
Yeah. Feel free to comment here. I'd like your questions. Just to address something, we've had 2 questions about what we're advocating for. Not advocating for anything. This is a story about how single-family home zoning developed the way it is, and why it was not inserted into this Complete Communities plan that we're talking about, and just kind of the implications that that's had on growth and in demographics in San Diego for a long time. It's a fascinating moment to be discussing why the city's segregated the way it is, also why homes are so expensive in some part, and why you can build apartments in some parts of the community and why you can't in others, as we try to address this housing shortage. So this is news going forward in the mayor's office, and we think you should be interested in it. As far as eliminating zoning laws, one thing I wanted to ask you, we always hear this trope about like a place like Houston that doesn't have supposedly zoning. Is that true? Can you have like an apartment right next to a house there? Is it that clear, or
so Houston doesn't have use-based zoning, which is essentially what we're talking about right now. They do have many development restrictions, which in effect have the result of a lot of zoning. So they still have parking requirements. They still have setbacks about how much land you have to build off of, how much space you have to build off of the road. They still have sort of density restrictions in some places. They just don't have traditional zoning. So it's a bit of a misnomer, but Houston is unique in city planning.
Got it. Okay, so another point here: are you advocating for equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity? No, but let's keep in mind when somebody's prohibited from buying a house somewhere, that is not equal opportunity. That's literally what that's counteracting.
I would actually say that the restriction of single family housing to an area, zoning an area to say that you can't build anything but single family housing, that is how I would describe equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity.
Right.
Equality of opportunity would allow the building of anything in that area as opposed to restricting it at the front end. So if you want a single family home in a world without single family zoning, you can still buy a piece of property and build a single family home. No one's going to be able to stop you from doing that. The question is what the people across the street from you and what the people around the block can do and what the people next door can do. And zoning, single family zoning specifically, I'm not necessarily talking about separating harmful industrial uses from residential uses. I think there's, and that is really the basis of the Supreme Court decision that said that this is allowed, that for health and safety and welfare reasons, you can do these sorts of restrictions, that this is a justifiable behavior of a city. With single family zoning, though, I think the question is whether this is legislating outcomes by telling people you can only build single family homes in a certain area, and therefore homes are going to be worth a certain amount, and only certain people are going to be able to afford to move to those areas, and all the attendant effects that come from that.
We're great comment. We're why are you watching?
Just turn it off. John, it's the age of the internet, my man. It's all kinds of stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting parts of your story, you dug up this history about single family zoning in some of these areas, and there was a point where you cited one of the advertising materials, I think, for one of these developments where it said, like, hey, you buy into this, you're buying into a contract for the whole area. Like, we're going to protect the area for you. And that's a really interesting concept, because we often come across that when we're talking about some of these developments in San Diego where neighbors do feel like there was a contract with them. And there's I think what we're exploring is that there is like a much different, there's a big gulf between people's perception of what the actual contract is with the area around them and what not. And let's be clear, like, your property is restricted under these laws, but that's the question coming forward, and the mayor's tracking is like whether that should be adjusted or not.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a comment here you can maybe pull up, Scott.
Yeah, which one?
Susan Baldwin says, the majority of housing that will be built according to general plans and zoning in the region will be multifamily housing. State housing element law requires cities, counties to zone for multifamily housing. Yeah, that's very true. It also means that if most of the housing is going to be multifamily and most of the single family areas are untouchable, that most of the disproportionately white, disproportionately high income single family areas that exist today will sort of be frozen in amber, and the responsibility to provide housing for the next generation of San Diegans and to attempt to do something about the housing crisis are going to fall on a disproportionately smaller set of neighborhoods in the city. So is it appropriate for some of those areas to essentially not have to be part of solving this crisis just because of a zoning decision that was made long before the people who are struggling to afford housing were even born?
Do you feel like something's changing with this whole discussion? Because for so long, when we were talking about housing, what would come up all the time when you brought up housing affordability is you would have a faction of conservatives and Republicans who would say the reason why that is because of government regulations. There is government regulations that make it hard to build homes and thus expensive. And if we got rid of that, we would be there. But recently, you mentioned this in a more broad way, though, with the region deciding where homes should be built is a discussion that's been ongoing at the San Diego Association of Governments. We get from the state a big number of how many housing units we should probably be building over the next few decades or whatever. And Sandag's supposed to hand that out to the different cities, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fair description. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The main groups of opposition to that, in particular, one is the mayor of Coronado, Richard Bailey. I think they even threatened to sue this process, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Bailey's arguably one of the most conservative, maybe closest to most conservative members of elected leadership in the county, right?
Yeah, he's like a traditional conservative. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's essentially with that arguing intensely for the most significant government restriction on housing development possible, literally that it prohibits housing to go in these areas. And so do you think we're starting to switch to where Republicans are just being more clear about just protecting these neighborhoods, like with the president's rhetoric on this issue? And are they abandoning the deregulation argument completely to the other side? I'm just curious. Do you think that's a phenomenon actually happening?
I don't know. I think one part of the reason that has made land use such a third rail topic in politics is because of this sort of partisan ideological incoherence, which I do think is present on both sides.
Sure.
You have conservatives who ostensibly want to deregulate. They believe in smaller government. Yet zoning is a complete. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It is a regulation of private property rights. That's what
it's a severe regulation of private property rights.
It is an extension of a city's police power to restrict private property rights on individual property owners. But for cultural reasons, because I think most conservatives live in suburban or rural areas, they are keen to defend it, even though there is a bit of a contradiction with their stated principles. And I think but I think liberals have their own relative incoherence on it, which is they recognize the need for affordable housing for people. They disapprove of the segregation that has resulted from certain development and regulations decisions. They recognize the need for public transit to address climate change and the nation's carbon footprint. Yet most of the people who build housing are developers, and they're financed by large banks, and increasingly have Wall Street plays much more of a role in the financialization of housing right now. And so they often find themselves kind of betwixt and between, arguing for some of these things that they want to produce denser, more urban cities, but it's going to benefit rich people who are not political allies, and so that gets them crossed up as well. So whether anything is changing right now, I don't know. I think it's just always been a bit of an area of a scramble. I do think Trump specifically getting in the mix could be something that really accelerates any sort of resorting that makes things more sensible, because boy, he has a way of clarifying what people think.
Yeah, to say the least. Yeah. So Andrew Malik tweeted at us, and I think what he's saying here is, I'm for adding density to single-family residential, but they're just physical restraints or constraints from doing so. What is he actually saying there? Like that, literally, like housing in a single-family zone would be hard to retrofit.
Yeah, and there might need to be significant infrastructure changes around.
Oh, right. Like actually make it easier to get in and out of those neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm not advocating for anything here, really, but insofar as I'm certainly not advocating for like overnight flip the switch, just rezone every neighborhood. Rancho Bernardo should be a great place to build downtown levels of density. But I would say that there are certainly areas where single family housing is the only type of housing that's allowed, that are in desirable areas near transit and near jobs, that if we built more housing there, would have beneficial effects on gentrifying areas already. The effect that the reason that is because people get priced out of a desirable neighborhood, and they don't suddenly take their down payment that they've saved up and just decide not to spend it. They go spend it elsewhere, and that elsewhere is typically the more affordable, area that is going through change, and then they buy, they buy a house for this. They buy the same amount of house they were going to buy in the desirable neighborhood, but now they get it at a discount, and then they remodel it, and that's how you see neighborhoods change quite a bit.
Just to be clear, I just got a question directly. This is Andrew Donahue or Andrew Keatts. Andrew Keatts, sorry, sir. This is Andrew Keatts, and I'm Scott Lewis. Sorry, we don't have the descriptors up there.
Sorry.
That's what's going on. Andrew Keatts writes about land use, does investigative journalism for us. A lot of stories up this week, and it's cool and great. Thank you for your work.
Let me answer one question. Cat White says, is San Diego City government watching SB 1120? Yes. And SB 1120 is proposed by San Diego's State Senator Tony Atkins. And yes, so it would allow any single family home lot to be split in two, and would allow by right any person on any lot to build a duplex. So yeah, I think the city government is watching that. In fact, the mayor's planning director Mike Hansen said that a local proposal to do something very similar to that some local groups like LISC San Diego and Ricardo Flores are pushing. He says that would actually, by his read of the law, be illegal today, and they could only do that if SB 1120 passed in Sacramento. So certainly does bear watching. Also, Portland just passed a law similar to SB 1120, but that allowed 4 units, a fourplex, on any family lot in the city, and up to 6 units if you reserved half of them for low-income residents. And I talked to a professor out of UCLA who said that a law like that applied across California would produce over 2 million new units, new homes in the state. And that's not like a theoretical capacity, which is what we often hear about with zoning, where your zoning allows for X amount of housing, but like you need a developer who actually has the money and wants to do it, and you need a property owner who actually wants to sell, and you need the economic cycles to time right, and you need all the other ancillary restrictions to allow it. He actually accounted for all of those things and said, if with this law taking everything into account, you would end up with like almost 3 million additional homes.
Wow, I didn't know that. Thank you. So Carl asks here, what about short-term vacation rentals? I'll just take the opportunity to explain what he's talking about there. Basically, a couple years ago, the city attorney, Mara Elliott, decided in just one-page opinion that the current municipal zoning law does not accommodate short-term vacation rental visitors staying in the area. It doesn't literally list that as an accepted use, and thus was de facto illegal, and the city should come up with new regulations to either make it legal or whatever, clarify that. Obviously, they spent 4 years failing horribly at that. And now there's a proposal to come up that would provide for a cap on the number of these things in the community. That's led by council member Jen Campbell. But I don't think they're actually modifying zoning with any of these proposals, are they?
No. Short-term vacation rentals. It's not a zoning question. It's theoretically you would need a use permit, which is different than a zoning permit for reasons that are too boring to get into. But no, it's not a zoning question.
So as you notice, Andy's he's a savant on this zoning stuff. Come on.
Andrew Malik, and Susan Baldwin are some of our questioners. They should really be.
All right. Well, let's bring this one up, because this is the chair of the Democratic Party, Will Rodriguez Kennedy. He makes a point, like, I grew up in housing built and managed by the New York City Housing Authority. We've had problems, but why don't we have something like that here? So we do have the Housing Commission, which is a offshoot of the city of San Diego, and it does manage some affordable, so restricted rent units that you have to qualify for with low income, and it manages the Section 8 housing vouchers. The federal government provides money to local areas to hand out these vouchers to make it easier to rent apartments in the community. But we do not actually have government managed housing. We have some situations developing that are kind of like that. The city's considering buying some hotels and transforming those along with the county. We right now have like 1,000 people still in the convention center, homeless individuals that we're going to have to apparently find permanent homes for. So it seems like we're getting toward that. But what is the difference between that type of housing and why it never came here?
Yeah, I mean, and then you could also say, like, in Europe they have like social where it's not even like income restricted, and so like, you know, anyone can get it.
Right. And it's mixed in through the community, unlike public projects in this country, right?
Yeah, so and that's gave public housing a bad name. The planning mistakes that went into the sort of tower in a park era of public housing development. So the state of California does have a constitutional constraint on public housing. Cities can have to take a vote to allow for a public entity to own and to build and own new housing. We did handle that back in 2016 with like a theoretical change. We just increased our capacity to build under that. So in the near term, the issue is basically a funding problem. It's my understanding of it. And the housing bond that'll be on the ballot in November will provide, you know, for a large number of affordable housing units to be built, but still not anything to the scale of what Will's talking about the, you know, what you see in other
like thousands of
thousands and thousand units. That the sort of thing where you make housing an entitlement, basically, and you say everyone has a right to housing, and for the people who cannot afford it, or because the market or no amount of market production will ever push prices down to provide you know, housing for somebody who's low income or struggling with addiction or something like that, that we need to just directly provide it for them. You know, we're billions and billions away from enough funding to address that sort of issue. But you know, those are decisions, you know, that we could make different decisions. But the structure is not in place right now to do that.
So you
well, I want to say Will seems to have taken issue with my use of the word entitlement. I use that not in a pejorative sense, but yes, as a human right, as a like distinguishing right now. Medicare is an entitlement in that you are entitled to it if you are over a certain age, right? You just get Medicare. It is an entitlement. The housing supports that we provide from the federal government are not like that. We don't just expand the pie to provide everyone who qualifies. We dole it out by lottery. So it is distinct, yeah, like literally by lottery. So it's fundamentally different. You know, it's not just sure. I know entitlements have been villainized in certain political circles, but I'm using the term in a technical way, in that it actually is something to which you are entitled.
Well, and in fact, it's unique among social safety measures, food assistance, income assistance, healthcare, in that it literally only goes to those who win a lottery or a wait list experience. There's no
for which we have resources to provide a small fraction of the people who qualify and who need it.
Which itself is just fundamentally bizarre. We could talk for an hour about that. Let's explain something else. You brought up the election. There's a couple of points about the election to talk about with this, but one of them is what you just mentioned, this bond. There is a property tax increase on the November ballot for the city of San Diego. I forget the exact multiplier. It's like 11 cents per 100,000.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It amounts to about $100 a year for an average priced home. At its capacity, so they won't start that high. It'll be allow them to get that high eventually. So that
Right.
tax would fund. It would be one part of the funding of affordable housing efforts in the city. So it would be matched with state and federal dollars to build some of these units, and they say about 9,000 units. Is that a fair summary of the whole plan?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, it's the 9,000 units includes the other sources that affordable housing developers would get from from the state specifically. So you get an amount from a local source like this revenue that would come in through property taxes, but then you would go out and use that to compete for funds from a state source or maybe a county source. And you can combine all those together and kind of put it together like a Jenga stack. Maybe have some private money as well to build these subsidized units.
Yeah.
So the 9,000 is the total amount
Right.
that after going through all the other amounts of money.
Right. Well, that is San Diego's housing situation 101. Last question. We have a mayor's race. It has featured, at least before the pandemic, I think still now, a big discussion about housing. Barbara Bree kind of set herself as I'm going to protect neighborhoods. I'm going to protect single family homes in a very fierce way. Todd Gloria set himself up as being the friend of people who want to see more development in different corridors of the city. You actually looked into that a few months ago, and I remember it was very insightful because what it found was that when actual decisions needed to be made in the city, Barbara Bree was hardly intense protectionist for some of these areas, and Todd Gloria was hardly a libertarian on housing, zoning, upzoning. So what else? I mean, should we remember about how the rhetoric might compare to the policy?
Yeah, I would say the only other thing I would add there, I do think both of their voting records are mixed. They sometimes they aggressively support increased development and sometimes they don't. I think that would be a fair description of both of their voting records on the matter. And also, they were separated by enough years that you could say that the politics around the issue changed. Like Todd specifically, when he was the city councilman in District 3, community plans in North Park and Hillcrest came through, and the Hillcrest plan didn't upzone at all. It didn't increase development potential at all over what had been in place. North Park did, but to a much lesser extent, and Golden Hill did, but to a much lesser extent. Whereas, some of the plans that Barbara Bree voted on that came forward when she was on the city council in the Bay Park area, in the sports arena area, in Old Town, in Mission Valley, were dramatic upzones, far more. And she voted for them. She, voted for them without, it wasn't like she was under duress or that she had her arm twisted. It was just, these were just sensible policies that she supported. The one other thing I would say is that she also has considerable support from developers, and Todd does as well. And so, I actually, for that story, I talked to some of the developers who were supporting Barbara Bree's campaign, and they basically said that some of them said, look, when she got on the council, I had really technical, specific, important conversations with her. She got it. She understands. She was trying to help in the right way. So I support her because I think she's going to be good at this. But also that, they also said basically that they didn't believe that the rhetoric was going to be the way that she actually ran the city if she was elected. That you say certain things in a campaign, and that's just politics. But that it's not what they expect to see out of her. Yeah.
Well, folks, if you have any other questions about housing, I'm into it. We did get another question on a different topic, Andy. Is a Padres question all right, or is there one of these over here you want to weigh in on?
No, looks good. Everything looks fine here.
All right, we've got Tommy Wright. He wants to know your thoughts on a Dylan Bundy to the Padres trade. Tell us about Dylan Bundy and whether the Padres should go get him.
I'm really glad that Dylan Bundy's having success in Anaheim. But more than that, I'm just pleased to have that stressor out of my life. And so, no, I don't want the Padres. I don't want to get back to being invested in the Dylan Bundy market.
What causes stress from Dylan Bundy?
Dylan Bundy was a top pick of the Baltimore Orioles, and was a much heralded phenom early in his minor league career. He was destined for greatness, and then one arm injury, and then another arm injury, and another arm injury. He didn't pitch for like 3 years. When he finally came back, they had to put him on the major league roster, even though he hadn't even like completed his development because he missed 3 years with injuries. And then he was just a shell of his former self, and it was kind of painful to watch them trot him out there every day, trying to salvage some value out of him. They finally gave up on the whole Dylan Bundy experience this year, traded him to Anaheim, and he has promptly become an ace. And so a lot of other Orioles fans are much aggrieved by how the Dylan Bundy situation has worked out. I'm not among them. I'm happy for him. I'm happier than if he had just gone on to fail. But no, I more than anything, I don't want that part of my life to come back.
I saw that. So I knew vaguely
It's like an
that
ex-girlfriend that's like doing well. You're just like, good, she's doing well, but no, I don't want to like
not hear about
friend's wedding.
yeah, good for her. Give me a drink.
Yeah.
Well, it is a weird world in the baseball tonight, and I'm sorry, it's a weird day in baseball world tonight. There is they stopped work. They aren't playing. It doesn't. I don't know if any games are playing, but the Padres canceled. I think we were going over this. The big question I have is when they come back. Like to me, they either come back tomorrow or it's a really weird mess for a while, like and maybe indefinitely. So I think the onus is really on those NBA leaders of this work stoppage of sports athletes. You know, are they going to just say like, this is what we can do? This is one day we did it. Let's see some real action. Or are they going to kind of leave it hanging for a while? In which case, I don't know what they have to see to resolve it. It could be really weird and long and just the whole thing is just another jarring moment for 2020 of like surrealness. Like, could never have fathomed a sports team not playing a game that was scheduled just out of
no. I mean, this would be. I mean, this is still an historic moment. This is like the most probably. I mean, besides Muhammad Ali, it's maybe the most profound political act that athletes have ever taken.
Yeah.
And it's
how could anything else compare? I mean, they shut down the NBA playoffs and other sports.
The fists at the Olympics. Muhammad Ali protesting the Vietnam War. Those are the big ones that jump out to me. But this is sports have been shut down like in a day, and it's like the 10th biggest story of the year. It's kind of amazing.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Voice San Diego at Home. Thanks for all your intelligent comments. You can put more there, and we will follow them and hand them out to the team if we don't know how to answer them. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate your time. I know you have to talk to me a lot, including for the podcast. If you follow if you care about local public affairs, go to the podcast every Friday. Appreciate it, and see what tomorrow brings. Could be weirder, huh?
I count on it. Count on it. Yeah.
All right. We'll see you folks on Friday. Thanks.